Karan, you're live.
Hello, everyone. Good morning and good evening. Good morning to Michael and a good evening to the. I am Karan, and we have Sai Karthik, and this is the second episode of Pathfinders, where we call distinguished personalities in the field of entrepreneurship to talk about the journey.
Awesome. So with us, we have a lot of young people who are joining live right now. We're getting some great numbers on YouTube. Mostly students from our college, National Institute of Technology, Trichy. I believe all of us are gathered here with one common passion, which is to create a world that's full of innovation and a better place for humans. So to give a brief intro about Michael Seibel, he is the current CEO and partner at Y Combinator, considered the Mecca of startups that has launched over 2,000 startups over the last 15 odd years. He has also been the CEO and co-founder of Social Cam and also one of the most popular streaming platforms among gamers, Twitch.tv. It started off as Justin TV. His accomplishments speak for themselves. And for more information about him, you can always hop onto his website or his Instagram handle. And also check out our recent post about Know Your Speaker, where we've timelined about him.
All right. Shall I get started?
Yeah, over to you, Michael. Sweet.
Perfect. So I'm really looking forward to all of your questions. I want to keep this kind of a tight talk. So I'd like to go through some of the lessons that I've learned in my last 15 years of doing startups. And I've particularly tuned this to young people who are in college or thinking about doing startups. And I want to start by saying, this might not be the inspiring speech that you expect. It might be a little bit more depressing. So get ready. The first lesson I've learned in the last 15 years is that this startup world is not actually for most people. What that basically means is that most people are not going to find this fulfilling. Most people are going to not enjoy the work. They're not going to enjoy the sacrifice and the amount of time it's going to take. They're not going to enjoy the fact that their peers and their friends are going to be out there having fun, and you won't be able to. Your peers might be making more money. Your peers might be enjoying their lives more than you will be. Also, a lot of people won't really like the fact that in a startup, in effect, you get punched in the face every day and asked to come back the next day to do the same. Everything is harder than it looks. Everything is more stressful than it looks. So I know that startups are very popular right now, but I'll tell you straight away, working with thousands of founders, this world is not for most people. And if it's not for you, that's okay. That's okay. You don't need to do it because people think it's cool or because your friends are doing it. You should do it because it's the world you want to live in, even if you don't succeed. Lesson number 2 is around your peers. So your peers can't guide you to success in the startup world. And this is an extremely important point. For most young people, putting themselves around very smart peers and then doing what they do has been the single best strategy for success. Whether it's doing well in middle school, getting into good classes for high school, studying and getting great grades at the right tests to get into good college, or doing what you need to do in college to get the right internship, right? Almost all of those things, you could look at someone who is a year ahead of you or look at a peer who's doing well and replicate what they did and succeed. In our world, in the startup world, the vast majority of your peers will not make it. The first day when we accept companies into YC and we have a kickoff, we tell them first, congratulations. But second, in a batch of 200 companies, we only expect 5 companies to succeed. That means that most of the people who are listening to the kickoff talk will not succeed. And so the trick is that if you act like the average startup, you'll have the outcome of the average startup. In what ways are you willing to do things that your peers disagree with, that your parents disagree with, that your teachers disagree with, things that your users want, but that everyone else would tell you you're stupid to do, things that investors disagree with. So more often than not, you're going to have to be an outlier amongst a group of very smart and talented people in order to win. So this is probably the first game that you all are playing where if you act like your peers, you'll lose. Keep that in mind. Number 3, I've always searched for a good analogy for startups. And I think that a lot of people search for professional analogies, and this creates problems. By professional analogy, I mean a banker, a lawyer, a doctor, right? A lot of people want to equate those types of jobs to the startup world. And unfortunately, they don't equate well. If you got into an amazing medical school and on the first day they told you that only 5 students in this room would be doctors, you would ask for your money back. That would not be acceptable.
Yeah, absolutely. That's true.
So the best analogy that I've been able to come up with here is sports. Because in the sports world, a lot of people want to do it, but everyone knows that the vast majority of people fail. They accept that. Whereas in kind of academics, it's easier for people to give you a second or a third chance. In sports, if you go to a tryout and you don't make it, you don't make it. In sports, if you're not good enough, you don't play. It's that simple. And I think those analogies are really, really helpful because when you're thinking about what it takes to be great, in sports at every level, you have to be amazing, right? When you're a kid, you've got to be amazing. When you're an adolescent, you have to be amazing. When you're college age, you have to be amazing. And each of those groups gets more difficult for you to be amazing. But if you do it, maybe you get to play professional. If you're even better, maybe you become a famous player. And so I want people to think about a sports analogy because in sports, if someone is telling you that you have to stay after practice to do extra work, if someone's forcing you to do that, you're not going to make it. You're the one who has to come early. You're the one who has to stay late. You're the one who's got to drive you. No one else is going to drive you. In sports, if somebody tells you when you're in 9th grade, I know the secret to becoming professional, you know they're lying.
Yeah.
You know they're lying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yet in startups, investors and people all the time will say, I know the secrets to building a great company. I don't know the secrets to building a great company. I can tell you some ways to not fuck it up, but you're the one who's got to figure out how to make it work. And so I would use a sports analogy, and I'll say this, you better love the sport you're playing because you know that sports are going to be extremely hard. It's going to be amazingly high competition and very few succeed. So you better love the process. Same thing with startups. You better love the problem you're working on and the users you're working for, because that's going to keep you moving when everyone tells you you're going to fail. All right. Number 4, friendships matter. Don't waste college. There are too many young people now who think of college as remedial. They're desperate to get out into the real world. This college thing, it's all fake. What I'll tell you is that you're never going to be around a group of more intelligent and motivated people with as little to do as when you're in college. Most young founders actually make their friends that become their co-founders in college. And so between fighting for the best internships and getting good grades and doing whatever else you're doing in school, please make sure you're making friends that you respect, that you want to talk to, that you think are smart. They're going to become ridiculously helpful. I used to think of myself as a recent college grad, but I'm getting older now. So I graduated college in 2005. I went to Yale, and Yale cost $150,000 back then. That was worth it based on making one friend. His name was Justin Kahn. He was the reason why I did startups. $150,000 was worth it for that one friendship. Classes, other peers, no. So make sure you make the friends that matter. Number 5, ignore trends. Ignore trends. This kind of comes back from this kind of your peers won't guide you feeling. Like the trends won't guide you either. If you're spending your time trying to figure out what VCs are tweeting and what kinds of industries they're into, if you're spending your time focused on whatever the hot tech is of the day, whether it's like, what is it, GPT-3 or fucking AI or ML, if you only are interested in something if everyone else is interested in it, it's going to be hard to be successful. Because almost every YC startup that succeeded, when the founders thought it was a great idea, everyone else thought it was a bad idea. With Twitch, we pitched the most famous VCs in all of Silicon Valley, the names that all of you know. We asked them, do you think a live streaming site based on video games would work? They universally all said no. They all said no. Everyone thinks crypto is a hot space, especially in 2017 when we had that big spike. Well, Brian Armstrong, CEO of Coinbase, did YC in 2012. In 2012, if you set up an account on Coinbase, you got 1 free Bitcoin. Guess what? Nobody cared. Yeah. Brian had a hard time raising after YC because nobody cared. That wasn't the hot trend. So are you brave enough to work on something that everyone thinks sucks now, but 5 years from now or 7 years from now, everyone will think is amazing? Everyone will tweet about it 5 years after you started working on it, right? We saw a ton of applications for Zoom, right? A ton of applications for a product that, when the Zoom founders built it, they probably imagined the world that we live in now, but most of us didn't. So ignore the trends. Be absolutely comfortable working on something that you believe is going to trend later. We have this phrase at YC that I love repeating because it comes up in so many different circumstances. You don't want to peak in high school. You don't want to work on a trend that's cresting right now, right? Yeah. We're aiming for that point in the future, not right now. And let's be clear that people are going to be celebrated when they're aiming for the point right now. People are going to raise money when they're aiming for the thing that's cresting right now. What you got to ask yourself is that what's important? Short-term success or long-term success? Is it important to get money today, to get articles today? Or is it important to build a successful company that's around 10 years from now? Because whenever you read the tech press, what you need to understand is you'll read stories about everyone raising money. You'll never read stories about those companies dying, right? We know 99% of the startups are going to die. Where are all the death stories? Those guys get left out. Unless you're big and you die, then they write a story, right? So ignore the trends, understand that you're trying to aim for a point 5 to 10 years in the future, and it's okay if it's not trending right now. All right, I got 2 more bonus ones, and then I'd like to jump into Q&A.
Sweet.
So the first one is, I'll say this. I had a lot of friends who started doing startups around the time that I did. So this would have been like the late 2000s. And it turns out that that was a very good time to do startups because there were 2 major trends occurring. One was the web application trend that started in the early to mid 2000s. The second was the mobile trend that started in the 2010s. So I have a lot of friends who made money. I have a lot of friends who are rich now. And the thing that always puzzled me was that most of them aren't happy, right? Like most of my friends now are millionaires who can provide for their family, who provide for their parents, who never have to worry about money again, who never have to have a job again. And they're not happy. What's going on there, right? I thought getting rich is supposed to make you happy. So one thing that I'll encourage you all to think about is that a lot of times in this game, people are optimizing for money over optimizing for satisfaction. The problem when you optimize for money is you'll never have enough. There will always be someone who has more money than you.
Yeah.
There will always be many people who have more money than you. And so if you're going to get joy out of your life based on where you are in that money ranking, that's not the game. I like to think of this a little bit differently. How good are you at converting money to satisfaction? Because it turns out that if you have 100x less money than the richest person on earth, but you can convert cash into happiness 100 times more efficiently, you're both equal. There are many people that I know who are not good at converting cash into satisfaction, into happiness. In my mind, if you're going to optimize anything, it's that. And it's kind of funny, right? Like there's a weird kind of parallel here. It's like, do you optimize for top line growth or you optimize for retention? The better your retention is, the smaller number of new users you have to convince to find you, right? In my mind, satisfaction is like retention stat, right? It's the hidden most important stat. Everyone wants to focus on top line growth. Everyone wants to focus on how much money you have. Nobody talks about how happy you are, how satisfied you are. Satisfaction is typically derived from having close friendships, from having family, from having kids, from having a good relationship with your parents, and from doing a job that you really like. That's where satisfaction typically comes from. It doesn't come from yachts and fancy houses and fancy cars. And by the way, I'm telling you as somebody who is rich, who does have access to yachts and fancy cars and fancy houses, that's not where my satisfaction comes from. That's not where it comes from. Okay, here's the last one. It's easy to feel like the world is controlled by other people and you just live in it. Here's the dirty secret. The world is your responsibility, no one else's. If there's a problem out there that you understand really well, if you don't solve it, don't bet on anyone else solving it. The more likely scenario is that nobody solves it. Most problems out there in the world are not solved. And I think we all inherently know that when we look around our cities, when we look around our communities, when we talk to our friends and family. I think we kind of inherently understand that we're not living in some kind of utopia, right? And so if there's something you want to change about the world, something you believe should be different about the world, if there's something that you have a special and unique insight on or expertise in, go change it. Don't wait. Because I think the thing that's constantly surprised me is how much founders just create the future. Not investors, not politicians, not business guys, not rich people. Startup founders. They make the future. And so when we're looking for startup founders to fund, we don't care about your grades or your resume or any of that stuff, right? Like, one of the things that makes us really excited is when we meet a founder who really gives a shit about something and wants to make the world a better place. And one of the advantages of working with so many international founders, I mean, I'll say it plainly. I think in the US, a lot of people are spoiled. I think that there are a lot of things that are pretty good. And of course, there are massive problems, but I think that you can live in bubbles in the US where you don't experience the problems that most people have. And so I meet way too many founders who have the skills to do a startup, but have no problems that they've ever had in their lives. What I love about working with international founders is that's a lot harder. In most countries, it's a lot harder to live in a bubble, to close your eyes to all the problems in your country. And international founders, more often than not, they're working on something because they think it's going to make their country a better place, and they have passion for that. Like, they have passion for their neighbors, for their fellow citizens. And I got to tell you, when you're getting punched in the face every day, that kind of passion is often what can get you through the pain. So, number 5, the world is your responsibility. Don't blame anyone else if it's not going the way you want. Go do something about it. All right. Those are my 7 points. That's all I've learned in the last 15 years. And now you know it all.
Yeah, sweet stuff.
Okay.
So, moving on into our Q&A session. Michael, just for your information, like, we have a set of questions that we got before the event. Those are the ones we'll be taking first, and after which, if you happen to have time, we'll be taking from the YouTube live chat section.
Sounds good.
So, here's the first one. Karan, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. So Aditya asks, what drove you towards being part of Y Combinator? What has the experience been of mentoring so many startups over the years?
So it's actually really simple. I think there were 2 things that drove me to YC. One, without YC, I would have not had any access to the tech world. I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't be talking to you. I wouldn't have money. I wouldn't be able to provide for my family. To me, the tech world felt like a completely closed building where all the doors were locked. And YC kind of said, here's the secret entrance through the basement. Like, come on in. And that changed my life. And so providing that secret entrance to other people seemed like the best way to say thank you to YC for everything you've done for me. My experience mentoring so many startups, I would say it's been tough for one reason. You constantly have to go back and forth between trying to be emotionally supportive, trying to be the founder's cheerleader, versus trying to point out the mistakes that they're making that will cause them to die. And that balance is very, very hard because it's different for every founder. Some founders can just take all the critiques and they don't want to hear the good stuff. They're like, I got other people to tell me the good stuff. Other founders, they need to hear the good stuff with the critiques in the right balance. And I think that what's tricky about my job is figuring out that balance for each founder, because it turns out that while the critiques hurt, they probably provide more value, but only if you're motivated, only if you're in the right mindset, right? If you're in the wrong mindset, the critiques are just going to get you down further. And so that's probably the hardest bit, because I think what's not obvious about this job is that I'm not sitting here giving out like the tactics to win, right? In many ways, I'm trying to help people manage their own emotions, right? I'm trying to, like, in many ways, you're more like a therapist. How do you get people to stay motivated for the amount of time it takes to find out whether your hypothesis is right and to kind of iterate and experiment? Like, how do you stay motivated during that is really probably what I've learned is the biggest part of my job.
Awesome. Super cool answer. I think, the shorter the answer, more the experience, they say. So Really showed that. Yeah. So yeah, here's a question from Siddharth Menu. So he asks, is it true that Y Combinator selects only post-revenue startups predominantly?
Um, so my answer there is that it depends. I would say that like there's a large portion of startups that are purely software based that are pretty easy to get up and running. And so in that category of startups, yeah, we like to see folks making revenue. Because if it should only take a month to build what you want, and you're more than a month in, you should start trying to get customers. Now, I don't want to say post revenue and make people think, oh, that means you have to apply to YC with $50,000 monthly revenue or $100,000 monthly revenue. No, of course not. But if you're building a software, primarily software startup, that you can build the MVP in 30 days, the 31st day, you should try to sign a customer, right? So
Yeah.
I would say that like this is probably true for B2B startups that either are or should be post-launch. We'd like to see some revenue, yes. But there's a lot of startups where that's completely irrelevant for. So it really depends on the type of startup you're doing. And let's be clear, it really depends on how long you've been working on it, right? Like if you've been working on something for a month, we judge you very differently than if you worked on something for a year. We can't judge based on those things are not equal, right? We can't just be like, oh, well,
Yeah.
which one of those two has $10,000 in revenue? That's irrelevant. No. So you really have to understand that the bar is different based on how long you've been working.
Okay, that was a very good answer. So the next question is by Akhil. He said, I once heard it is best to start a startup in growing markets. And now this goes against your speech in a way. He asks, what are the current
Yeah.
emerging markets according to you? So,
You know, I find this to be a funny question. Like,
yeah.
you guys are in a growing emerging market.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny. The more startups I work with in India, the more that I hear sometimes that Indian investors aren't bullish on India. And I'll be really specific. I think sometimes investors are really focused on what's going to happen over the next 2 years. And, you know, I have a lot of Indian companies that'll try to raise money from Indian investors, and they'll say, oh, well, are you going after US companies? Are you going after other companies? Because they worry that the Indian market won't be ready for this product or won't be willing to pay as much for this product after 2 years. And I always think that's funny because, like, we invest in companies based on what the world's going to be like 10 years from now. And if you look at India 10 years ago, it's pretty simple to think that the India of 10 years from now is going to flourish even more. So be careful with this one. Be careful about, you know, you're in a growth phase for your country. People starting companies now, 30, 40 years from now, are going to be the Steve Jobses, the Mark Zuckerbergs, the people who are running companies that almost shape the country you all live in. So, yeah, you just look down at your feet. You're standing in an emerging market that's pretty damn cool.
Yeah. Super awesome. So we have a very uh, interesting question from a very interesting person. He calls himself entrepreneur. He asks us, what's the most important quality for becoming an entrepreneur from a entrepreneur? So
I love that.
yeah.
I love this question. Okay. I think that there's like a continuum. So I'm going to try to frame this right. Let's continue. Okay, here we go. This is fun doing this backwards. Okay. So there's a continuum and you want to be in the middle. So on one side of the continuum, there are people who are too interested in the startup scene. They're too interested in near-term success. They're too interested in raising money, getting invited to the right conferences, being friends with famous people. And they kind of don't care what product they work on or what problem they solve if they can get those things. So that's one level of failure. That's one level of entrepreneur. That's one side of it. There's the other side that people don't often talk about. There are the people who are too close-minded, too principled. I'll only solve this problem if it's solved in the exact way that I want it to be solved. If my users don't like it, screw them. I'll only do this company if it's remote. I only have to work 6 hours a day, and we only use like cool new tech that I like, or something, you know, stupid shit like that. People who don't really have an engineer's mindset, where it's like, get the problem solved. That's an engineer's mindset. Get the problem solved, right? The researcher's mindset is a little bit more like, oh, what's your interests? Let's explore your interests.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think that like failure operates on both of these poles. Can you have enough principles so that you can stay motivated, but not too many principles so that they get in the way of getting the job done? Can you have enough passion so that you stay motivated, but not too much passion that you're not willing to listen to your users and learn from them? And so I think that there are entrepreneurs on both sides. And it's weird because I think the entrepreneurs on one side, they're like, oh, screw VCs, screw investment. You shouldn't need to raise money, yada, yada, yada. Which is a fine attitude, right? But the engineer in the middle is going to be like, well, if that money can help me do the thing I want to do, great. If it can't, great. I'm not going to be religious about it. The entrepreneur on the other side are the folks who are bragging about their $2 million seed round, but that you know will never actually do anything. Or the folks who want to, you know, hang out with people who are 15 years older than them because they're the cool people. Instead of realizing that one day their peers, if they put themselves in the right group of people, will be those people. One day their peers will run the ecosystem. You don't have to kiss up to all the older people. So
Yeah.
that's how I see it.
I'm curious, with reference to the idea, let's say of your startup idea, how would this scale up? Like falling in love with your idea, would you recommend that? Like when you say with reference to people, when it comes to the execution of your idea per se.
I think that falling in love with your idea is dangerous. Falling in love with your problem and your customer is perfect. Because if you think about it, right, you want to be in a situation where if your customer tells you your product's not working, you're not mad at your customer. Oftentimes when people are too in love with their idea, when their customer is like, this doesn't work for me, they're like, screw you, you're a shitty customer. You know, and it's like, sometimes that's true. Sometimes they are a shitty customer, but sometimes you just don't understand the right solution. And I think this is like, what's so funny is that like in science, we accept this all the time. In science, you have a hypothesis, you run an experiment, you learn something, you want a new experiment, right? Whereas for some reason in startups, people think that the way it should work is before you run the experiment, you should already know the answer. That's hard. That is hard. It's much easier to understand the problem well, to have some observation about the world, understand the problem well, and try to solve it, and learn through trying to solve it. That's a much better attitude.
That made it much clearer. So we have the next question from a person called Arjun. He's like, what are your thoughts on an entrepreneur's work culture? Is it possible to have a good work-life balance in this lifestyle?
No.
Okay.
I'm not that into sports that are in India. What's the biggest sport in India?
Cricket.
I was going to guess that, but I didn't want to be wrong. So if you're the best cricket player today, do you think you got good work-life balance?
Maybe not.
Probably
Mostly not.
Probably not.
Yeah, mostly not. Yeah,
mostly not. Fine.
You're probably practicing a ton, working out a ton, like doing all kinds of weird shit to your body to make sure you recover well, eating like only the best food, not going out too much, right? Like, or else your game's going to suffer. So I want to think about this question in two ways. Is it possible to have a good work-life balance? Probably not. Is it possible to have good mental health? Yes. I think it is possible to have good mental health if you think about it, if you work on it. Which means, do you build time into your life for friends? Sure. Do you build time into your life for working out and eating well? Sure. Do you do those things? I think it's possible to do those things. But when you know, on Sunday night, when you think about your last week, will you feel like you had a good balance of work and fun? No. If you think about your next week, will you think that way? No. Here's another funny thing about kind of peaking too early. You don't want to peak in high school. One thing I'll tell you is that a lot of my friends in their 20s who didn't do startup got good jobs and had a lot of fun in their 20s. And I didn't. And I'll tell you, it is better to be rich in your 30s and try to have fun than to have kind of some money in your 20s and have fun. I never felt bad for the parties that I missed in my 20s. Never. So, yeah. But no, work-life balance, find another industry.
Nice, lol. Thing is, also Bill Gates once said like he never took a day off from his 20s. I think it's a very, very popular quote. So yeah, spot on. I think almost all the famous and successful people have like similar mindsets, I suppose. So moving on, we have our next question. It's from Rohan. He asks us how important are failures in the life of an entrepreneur, and what are some early mistakes a co-founder makes?
I'll do it co-founders first. Common mistakes. One, starting a company with someone you don't know or you don't know well, that you haven't had some personal or work relationship with. The reason why this is a big mistake is that oftentimes when there's stress in your startup, there isn't an existing relationship between you two so that you can support one another through the stress.
Mm-hmm.
The result is often you get mad at each other. And also because you don't have that existing relationship, nothing prevents you from saying that thing that you can't take back. That kind of destroys your work relationship. So there's kind of two advantages of working with people that you know. One is they can support you, right? You want to cry on their shoulder. And two, when you're mad at them, you don't say the thing that destroys the relationship. The second big mistake that co-founders make is they don't establish clear roles and responsibilities early. We made this mistake a ton. The way that you can build trust amongst your co-founding team is you make different people responsible for different things and you let them succeed or fail. And by putting them in a position where they can feel responsible, they'll be motivated to succeed and they'll learn if they fail. If you don't clearly distribute responsibilities, so, hey, you're in charge of fundraising, you're in charge of talking to users, you're in charge of the back end, you're in charge of the web, the mobile app. If you don't figure out a way to distribute responsibilities, everything ends up being a group decision. And therefore, nobody takes responsibility for failure, and everyone wants responsibility for the success.
Mm-hmm.
Also, if you don't divide up responsibilities, you end up spending a lot more time coming to consensus around how to do something, how to build something, as opposed to just letting the person who's specialized, who's looking at that problem every day, make a decision. And so I think those are the two biggest mistakes I see early co-founders making. Here's the third. Reading the press and using it against the CEO. I want to say this very specifically around fundraising. Very often I'll see a co-founding team look at the press and say, this shitty company raised $10 million. Why can't we? That's not helpful. You have no idea why that company raised $10 million. You don't know if it's shitty or not, or maybe there's some stats you haven't seen. You don't know whether those founders made money for someone else, had an existing relationship with someone else. You don't know any of the circumstances around that money. So demotivating your team members based on incomplete information doesn't build a strong team. How important are failures in the life of an entrepreneur? I'll answer that question very simply. Whenever you talk to a founder of a successful company in a very honest situation, where they're not performing, where they're not talking to the press or to the general public, they will almost always tell you the stories of failure, not the stories of success. I remember the 5 times that Twitch almost died. When I tell stories, those are the stories I tell. When I talk to the old employees, those are the stories that we remember. Like that's what shapes you. And so, yes, while at the moment they're scary and horrible, those are the moments that you actually cherish. Those are the memories you cherish. Those are the moments that you overcame. Right? Like it's a lot. You learn a lot more by being an underdog and overcoming something than by being anything else.
Okay. That was a very deep answer. Yes. So there's one more question from Sabrinathan. He says, would you say startups have become easier or harder over time? I mean, you see thousands of startups now, except they have resources never seen before to support them. So
different. It's different. I would say, okay, let's go through what's easier, what's harder. I think that in 2006, when I started, things that were easier, there was no scene. The startup scene was very small. It wasn't global like it is now. It wasn't even national. And so there were no expectations. Like our friends were shocked that we were able to raise $50,000. And then they were shocked we were able to raise $200,000. And then they were shocked we were able to raise $2 million. In fact, when we raised $2 million, one of our friends told us, you should probably just run away with that money. Like that's probably the best you'll do in your life. And so there were no expectations back then. That was really nice. Number two back then that was really nice was that people did startups because they're passionate about doing startups, not because it seemed like a good career move. Because most people weren't doing startups. It was cool to be a banker back then. Everyone wanted to be a banker and a consultant. And so all of the scenesters, right, all the wantrepreneurs, they weren't wantrepreneurs. They were bankers and consultants. And so you didn't have to mess around with them. That was good. Number three, people were impressed that you could just build something. Back then, being able to like build and launch a product online was more impressive. And so that was nice. Part four, more often than not, you were among the first people building this type of product for this platform. And so you didn't have to do as much research about folks who had come before you and failed. That was a big one. And also you didn't have this like motivation hit of knowing the companies that had failed before you try to do the same things. Because more often than not, you were trying to do something that was only recently possible. Those are the pluses. The things that were harder. It was harder to build. I mean, this was pre-cloud computing. Like we were racking servers. And it was funny because we were among the first users of Amazon EC2. We got to use it in beta. Right now, EC2 is just, it feels like it's always been there. It's like, no, it hasn't, yes. Motherfuckers. It hasn't always been there. Like,
yeah, that's everywhere.
I remember when we were moving Justin TV, we had to move between 2 data centers. And that literally involved us like taking servers out of racks, putting them in the like back of our car and driving them like 20 minutes to another building. and like installing them while trying to make sure our website stayed up. So, that was harder. Credit card processing was harder. It took 3 months to get credit card processing up and running. So there was a lot of kind of building blocks that were a lot harder. There was a lot less money available. A lot less money, right? A good seed round was $200,000. And there was a lot less advice that was available. Paul Graham's blog posts were probably the only consistent source of good startup advice back then. So some things are easier, some things are harder. I would say like nowadays, what's so interesting is how quickly you can get a product to market. Like it took us 4 months to get Justin TV live. I think that you could release the first version of Justin TV with 1 week of hard work now. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. I mean, kind of shows how we're exponentially developing respect technology across the world. And
One second. I'm curious. You said like there's more money now. So personally, would you call that a good thing or a bad thing? If you're more money is available to entrepreneurs, because I've heard both views.
Yes, it is both. I love this. I love this question because it gives me the opportunity to say something that I like to say a lot, which is that you always want to be careful when you're reducing a multivariable problem to a single variable, right?
Okay.
So is money good or bad? Okay. So back then, what was nice about not having a lot of money is that like you couldn't spend a lot of money. So that picked for stronger founding teams that could build the product internally because you couldn't hire people. That picked for being more frugal, spending more time in the apartment as opposed to trying to get the nice office. That picked for like having to really give a shit about your numbers, right? So like those things were very positive. On the negative, it was really hard to build an operationally intensive business. Basically impossible. No one would give you enough money, especially if you're a first-time founder. What I'll tell you, though, is that what I'm starting to see now are a lot of the negative effects of money being too available. So it's funny, and I'll say this in a way that makes YC look a little bad. In some ways, Demo Day is getting a little too good. In some ways, it's getting a little too easy to raise money. And so what happens when it's too easy to raise money? One, you start thinking that your product has product market fit. Because if it didn't, why would these people who are famous investors be giving me money? Right? So you start ignoring your users as the signal for product market fit and looking at your fundraising and your cap table, your investors, as a signal, which is never the right move. The vast majority of the investments that your investors make will fail, and you don't even know what they are. You only really know the successful ones. The second thing it'll do, the trigger for feeling like you have product market fit, is hiring. And honestly, Indian companies fall into this amongst some of the worst, right? Like a lot of Indian companies have too many employees. And I'm sure you all know that from working at some of these companies. Yet, when those same people go start startups, I watch them hire too many freaking employees. And they always say the same thing. Oh, well, talent's cheaper. It's like, okay, then hire better people. Don't hire more people. And so that creates the next issue where you start to having to become a manager. And that takes away from being a product leader. It's extremely important for the founders to be product leaders early because that's how they find product market fit, by interacting with the customer. But once you have 10 employees, you got to start interacting with the employees. They're going to have things they want. They're going to have needs. They're going to want to be communicated to. They're going to want to be managed. Now you have 20 employees. That burden more than doubles. So you spend more and more time getting away from your customers. So money causes those things. And what's interesting is that as of late, our advice to YC founders has been, you can raise less money, right? Most founders are not like, here's a horribly positive thing about YC. If you're a good company in YC, like a company that all the investors think is worthy of investing in, I'll say good, right? From a weird perspective. Good meaning investors want to give you money, not good meaning it's going to turn out well. You're in a weird situation where you might want to raise $2 million and there might be $20 million of interest. You might have to say no to $18 million. Now, I'll tell you, most startup founders, they're not built for that. Most startup founders before YC, everyone told them no. So now there's $20 million of money out there and like they only need two. Oh, well, maybe we need 2.5. Maybe we need 3. Oh, with 4, this is what we could do, right? And then bam, they get into this trap. And so more often than not, we tell founders, think about using money as like a forcing function. If you raise less money, you have to be more frugal. You have to be more efficient. The engine has to run better. You have to hire better. It forces you to have the right habits. Whereas if you raise more money, more often than not, it allows you to have bad habits. It covers up bad habits, especially in the beginning. So anyways, that's how we talk about it.
Awesome. Michael, before we wrap up the session, we'll take like final 2 questions.
Okay.
Both of them are about our startup ecosystem, one Indian specific and one in general.
Okay.
So here's one of them. It says, it's from Venkatesh Muri. It says, what do you think is broken about our startup ecosystem?
I have to be honest, like I don't like using the word broken, right? Like I don't think any startup ecosystem is terribly efficient, right? It's hard to build an efficient startup ecosystem. If we were to define efficient as one founder in, $1 billion company out the back end, right? That's almost impossible. And so I don't necessarily know that anything is broken about the startup ecosystem, but I will say this. I think of the startup ecosystem as global, not local. So I think that like if you are just thinking about the startup ecosystem in your town or in your city, there probably could be a lot of things wrong. But if you realize that you have access to founders everywhere in the world, investors everywhere in the world, I think startup ecosystem is doing just fine.
Awesome. So one final question. Karan, you can go ahead with this one. So yeah.
So Sanju is asking, in India, we see a large number of startups emulating ideas from other developed markets. What is your take on this approach to building startups?
So I like this question because once again, it is taking a multivariable problem and reducing it to a single variable, right? I actually think that from the outside, it's easier to judge this as what's happening than from the inside. So let me be more specific. I think that there's a lot to learn from more developed countries, right? And I think the problems that humans have tend to translate cross borders. And so I think that when you see a startup trying to attack a problem in your market, it's likely that there's some startup that's tried to attack that problem in our market, right? Like humans are humans, right? And so I don't want to knock that. The thing that I want to knock is when they try to build the solution exactly the same. It's when they try to copy the solution perfectly, because cultures are different. Cultures are different. Users have different needs. And the infrastructure is different, right? The conditions on the ground are different. And so what I actually see is a lot of founders, their V1 is somewhat of a replication of what exists out in the market. But then the good founders iterate. and their V2 and their V3 and their V4 start looking very different than what's out there in the market. So if you want to use this as a method to get started, I think it's great. But if you're running your company and you are copying what the startups in the West are doing to solve this problem, instead of talking to your users, then I think you're walking down the wrong path. So I apologize, because it's kind of a subtle answer, right? It's like, in some ways, copying can be fine to start, but like in many other ways, copying can be really different. And what's been so much fun working with Indian startups is seeing how, in some ways, the cultures are the same, right?
Mhm.
In some ways, they're different. And then here's the more fun thing. It's in seeing how, in some ways, India is going to leapfrog the US. Like seeing, in some ways, the solution that the US built was built in a time when technology wasn't available. And the solution that's going to be built in India is going to be built in a time when software is available. And so, there was one startup I remember we were speaking to who they were talking about how food in India is local, right? If you buy food at the store, most likely it was grown in your region. And if you go to another part of the country, more often than not, as a result, they're eating different food because different agriculture. In America, we don't have that.
Yeah. Yeah. True.
You go to the grocery store in New York, you go in the grocery store in California, same food. Same food. Now, that happened over the course of the last 70, 80 years. That might happen to India, but with software, it might not. Like, you guys might end up getting a different food system because you might not see the industrialization of the food system happening the same way. Because if we give software to the little farm, maybe it survives. Maybe it doesn't have to get bought by the big guy and then the bigger guy and the bigger guy. Maybe you don't go through that path. And so I think what's so cool about working with emerging market companies is you start seeing solutions that we can't have in America. And here's the last kind of note I'll give you on this one that really blows my mind. I've done a lot of traveling in Africa over a 2-year period of time. And I had 2 moments that really kind of stuck with me. The first is when I went to Nigeria and I was told that there are over 200 million cell phone lines, over 200 million cell phone subscriptions in a country with 180 million people. And there are only 100,000 landline telephone lines. And you're like, oh shit. Like you start thinking, wow, it's way easier to build a cell phone tower than it is to run wires to every house in a country. In America, we had to run wires to every house.
Absolutely.
And then the second one was I was in this border crossing. There's this river that basically connects 4 countries. And there's a border crossing where you can actually go to 3 different countries from any other country in that border.
Where exactly was this?
This is on the border of Zambia. And the river is the Zambezi River. And as I crossed over the border, I got a text message that said, oh, we noticed you're now crossing into Zambia. And by the way, this is in the middle of nowhere, right? There's no cities anywhere close. We noticed you're now crossing into Zambia. Here are the new cell phone rates. And I said to myself, oh shit, like that's crazy. In the middle of nowhere, and I'm connected. And so in my mind, that's what's so cool about working in emerging markets is that like the solutions are going to be better. And the same VCs who today in your market think that the US is the holy grail, like 30 years from now, those same people will say, oh no, India's way better.
Probably, yes.
And when we in America look at what's going on in India, I think sometimes it's easier for us to see how you guys are going to get things that are cooler than what we have. It's easier for us to see that in a weird way. Anyways,
I have one personal question which I would like to ask you.
Yep.
What are some books you think everyone should read? It's a customary question.
Yeah, I hate the book question. The only reason why is that I end up consuming a lot more of my startup information from blogs. I'll say this. I think there's one book that everyone should read. It's has nothing to do with startups. It's a book called Shogun. The author is James Clavell. And I think that the reason why this book is very interesting is that it opened up this piece of advice that I never quite understood until I read the book, which is that a lot of people find themselves in situations where they feel as though there's only two paths. I got to choose A or B. That's it. And what this book opened up to me was the idea that sometimes delaying a decision is a good decision. And today it looks like A and B is available. But if I can figure out how to delay for a week, maybe C becomes available. If I figure out how to delay for a month, maybe C and D become available. And suddenly I have better options. So whenever you're given an A-B choice, understand that there's always option C, which is to delay. And then in terms of startup advice, I'd recommend looking up this blog called Blog P Marca. It is the blog that Mark Andreessen wrote before he started A16. And I got to tell you, as a young founder, that was amazingly impactful to me. I loved that. I found it's funny, I grew up with YC. So I already knew the YC stuff, the PG's blog post. Blog P Marca was really impactful for me on top of that.
Okay.
Awesome. So I think you're running out of time as well. So this was the appointed hour, 9:30, 10:30. We are 6 minutes into spillover.
Okay.
So yeah. Thanks a lot, Michael. I mean, it was an absolutely insightful session. I mean, this is probably the first time that we at NIT Trichy are have gotten such a prolific speaker, and we hope this is the start of many. So I mean, good and at a personal level and at an organizational level as well. Kudos to what YC is doing. You're enabling such wonderful startups. I mean, since the last decade, and please do keep doing that. And that's the best wishes from our side. So.
Well, thanks for having me. And it was really great meeting all of you. And good luck with your startups. I think this is such a great community to join, the startup community. And you're all very lucky to be able to do it. All right. I'll see you later. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Thank you to our viewers as well who've tuned in. So that's the end of our session. And also, if in case you want to reach out to Michael, you can always go to his website or his Instagram page and just drop a message. So that's me and
Pardon?
Signing off from as part of Pathfinders. Until we bring a new episode, this is us signing off. So